I've never been able to work it out. It's almost as though he's playing some kind of game and he's above himself and and he sees everything. It's like weird. I don't know.
To have the pace though.
Yeah.
Like,
sharp.
Dribbling ability, but the IQ,
the strength.
Touch, it's not fair, is it?
Gary Lineker has spent decades being the nice one, the polished one, the man who never loses his cool, never says the wrong thing, never throws anyone under the bus. He's been on your television screen since the 1980s, and somehow, through all of it, he's kept that reputation completely intact. I am Oliver, and this is Sport Icons.
But even nice guys have a list. On The Rest is Football, the podcast Lineker hosts with Alan Shearer and Micah, the gloves occasionally come off. Not with anger, not with cruelty, but with the kind of quiet, matter-of-fact honesty that almost lands harder. Because when Gary Lineker tells you a player was genuinely terrible, you believe him. He's not trying to make headlines, he's just telling you what he saw. So today, we're going through the 8 players that Lineker and Shearer have placed on that list. And these aren't just players who had a bad season, some of them conned their way into the game. Some collected millions without earning a single minute. Some arrived with genuine hype and simply fell apart in front of everyone. These are the stories football doesn't always want to tell. Lineker finally has. Let's start at the very top. The name that comes up first every single time, without fail, Ali Dia. In November 1996, Southampton received a phone call. The caller claimed to be George Weah, the AC Milan striker, FIFA World Player of the Year, one of the greatest footballers alive at that point. And this caller had a favour to ask. His cousin, a striker named Ali Dia, needed a club. World-class talent, the voice said. You'd be lucky to have him. Southampton manager Graham Souness said yes. No trial, no footage, no second opinion, just a name, a phone call. Dia was in. Now, think about who Graham Souness is. A man who played in some of the hardest midfields in European football. A man who managed Rangers, Liverpool and Galatasaray. A man who is not, by any stretch, naive. And yet, Ali Dia walked straight through the door. On November 23, 1996, Dia came off the bench against Leeds United. Within minutes, something was very wrong. He couldn't control the ball. His movement made no sense. His teammates reportedly looked at each other trying to figure out whether he was carrying an injury, because the only other explanation was simply too strange to accept. He lasted 53 minutes before Souness pulled him off, having seen enough. The contract was terminated within weeks, and Ali Dia disappeared from professional football entirely. The phone call, it turned out, was never from George Weah. Weah had no cousin named Ali Dia. Nobody ever established exactly who made that call. What we know is that someone convinced one of football's toughest managers to sign a player who couldn't perform at professional level, and that player walked onto a Premier League pitch and proved it in real time. Lineker and Shearer put him at number 1 on any worst player conversation. It's genuinely hard to argue. Not because Dia was simply bad, plenty of players are bad, but because the whole thing was a con, and it worked, and for 53 minutes the Premier League was his stage. If Ali Dia was a fraud, Bebe was something else entirely. He was real. Talent existed, at least in glimpses. The signing was legitimate, the money was serious, the manager who bought him was Sir Alex Ferguson, arguably the greatest football manager who ever lived, which makes what happened next genuinely difficult to explain. In the summer of 2010, Ferguson signed Bebe from Vitória de Guimarães for £7.4 million, a Portuguese winger 20 years old, supposedly full of potential. Ferguson later admitted he hadn't watched Bebe play before signing him. He trusted the people around him, intermediaries, scouts, voices in his ear, and on that basis alone, £7.4 million changed hands. At United, Bebe made 6 appearances. He scored once in the League Cup, in a game that didn't carry much weight. After that came loan spells Besiktas, Rio Ave, Panathinaikos, and Fika, each one a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't working. He was sold in 2014 for a fraction of what United paid, eventually finding a lower league life in Spain that bore no resemblance to the career everyone assumed he'd have. What makes this story harder to dismiss is where Bebe came from. Grew up in an orphanage in Portugal with almost nothing and clawed his way into professional football through sheer persistence. That part of the story is genuinely extraordinary. Cruelty is that his name became shorthand for one of the strangest recruitment failures in Premier League history, rather than the comeback story it deserved to be. Lineker and Shearer return to Bebe whenever the conversation turns to agent manipulation and the quiet chaos behind modern transfers. He's proof that even the best managers aren't immune. Every failure looks the same. Bebe tried and fell short. Ali Dia was never really there at all. But Winston Bogarde looked at the situation, understood it completely, and made a choice. Chelsea signed him in 2000 on a 4-year deal worth around £40,000 a week. He was a Dutch international who'd played for Barcelona and AC Milan, and he arrived with a CV that suggested he could do a real job in the Premier League. What followed was 4 years of near-total silence. 12 appearances across the entire contract. Every loan offer refused, every nudge toward the exit ignored. And here's what separates Bogarde from everyone else on this list: he never pretended otherwise. When the press came calling, he didn't hide behind injury excuses or talk about bad luck and poor form. He said plainly that he wasn't walking away from the best contract of his life. "I may be one of the worst buys in Premier League history," he admitted, "but I don't care." Not a man in denial, a man who understood exactly what he was doing and did it anyway, week after week, while his boots gathered dust in the corner. Lineker brings him up in that specific context, not as a player who couldn't cut it, but as a player who decided not to. That distinction matters more than it might seem. Most names on this list represent ability that never arrived. Bogarde represents something colder, a deliberate, sustained absence of effort. Whether you find that honest or infuriating probably says something about you. Massimo Taibi is the mirror image of all of that. Where Bogarde felt nothing, Taibi felt everything, and the weight of it broke him publicly. Manchester United paid £4.5 million for him in 1999, came from Serie A with genuine credentials, and his debut was composed enough that United fans let themselves feel optimistic. Then came Southampton. Shot from Matt Le Tissier, not a thunderbolt, not some swerving effort from distance, just a straightforward, mid-pace strike that rolled directly through Taibi's hands and into the net. The kind of goal that every goalkeeper at every level stops as a matter of routine. The kind that, when it doesn't get stopped, feels like it rewrites everything people thought they knew about you. The footage played on every football program in England for weeks. 4 games into his United career, Taibi was shipped out on loan to Regina, never played for the club again, eventually rebuilding something quieter back in Italy, a career that continued but never recovered its shape. Shearer and Lineker cite him as the clearest example of what Premier League scrutiny can do to a goalkeeper who isn't quite ready for it. Not a bad player. A player who arrived at exactly the wrong moment and never got another chance to prove it was a blip rather than a verdict. Bogarde cost Chelsea a contract. Taibi cost United their faith in that summer's transfer window. Next 2 players cost their clubs something more straightforward, serious money, paid up front, in exchange for almost nothing delivered. West Ham paid £9 million for Savio Nsereko in January 2009. He was 19 years old, a teenage striker from Brescia, with pace that scouts apparently couldn't stop talking about. 5 appearances later, 0 goals scored, and the excitement was gone. By the summer of 2010, so was he, his career drifting through lower leagues in Germany and Italy before fading out completely. The context around Nsereko matters here. He was a teenager dropped into a West Ham side that was already struggling, far from home, with no clear support structure around him. Reports of poor training sessions surfaced, but the image that sticks isn't of a difficult personality, a young man handed far too much, far too soon, inside an environment that couldn't hold him together. The £9 million went with him when he left. Corrado Grabai is the name Shearer reaches for whenever Blackburn comes up in these conversations. Signed in 2001 for £6.75 million after finishing as top scorer in Serie B, Grabai arrived at Ewood Park as the statement signing of a club trying to recapture something it had lost since the title-winning days. 1 goal in 19 appearances later, he was back in Italy. Shearer, who briefly played alongside him, has described it as one of the most bewildering signings he witnessed during his time at Blackburn, a man who scored freely in one league and could barely get near the ball in another. The gap between Serie B pedigree and Premier League reality closed around him inside a single season, and it never opened again. At least Nsereko and Grabai arrived without the full weight of Premier League expectations sitting directly on their shoulders. The next 2 strikers had no such shelter. Both came with recent form, genuine press coverage, and every statistical reason for fans to believe the money was well spent. Both scored exactly 1 Premier League goal. Between them, across 68 appearances. Norwich paid £8.5 million for Ricky van Wolfswinkel the summer of 2013. He'd just come off a prolific run at Sporting CP in Portugal, goals coming regularly, confidence visibly high, the kind of form that convinces a club's recruitment team to stop deliberating and write the check. What followed was almost mathematically cruel. His 1 goal came on the opening day of the season against Everton. Norwich fans spent the rest of that campaign convinced the next one was coming. It never did. 26 appearances, 1 goal. Relegated at the end of it, with Van Wolfswinkel heading back to Europe soon after, top-flight English football permanently behind him. People who watched him that season didn't see someone coasting or going through the motions. They saw a player who looked genuinely lost, technically able, but mentally somewhere unreachable, unable to adjust to the way space collapses in England before a striker has even registered it was there. The Premier League defending pressed him into hesitation, and hesitation in front of goal is fatal. Some strikers find their footing after a rough start. Van Wolfswinkel ran out of runway by December, and the club ran out of patience not long after. Josie Altidore's time at Sunderland runs parallel to that story, and somehow sits even heavier. £6.5 million arrived the same summer of 2013, carrying the momentum of a strong run with the United States national team. 1 Premier League goal in 42 appearances. That number is so bleak, it barely needs anything added around it, but the context matters because it explains how you end up there rather than just confirming that you did. Altidore has spoken openly about what those years felt like, the way a missed chance in front of goal doesn't just disappear, but follows you into training, into the next game, into the way you position your body when the ball arrives in the box again. Missing breeds missing. At Sunderland, a club that was cycling through managers and shedding stability from every direction, there was no structure around him capable of breaking that cycle. The environment was already fracturing, and a striker whose confidence had left him was never going to find it again inside a club that couldn't hold its own shape together. Lineker and Shearer used that ratio specifically, and the conversation turns to striker failure not as a punchline, but as a number that tells you something real about what pressure and isolation do to a footballer when they arrive at the same time. Both Van Wolfswinkel and Altidore are cautionary tales about expectation without infrastructure. The fee gets paid, shirt gets handed over, then the club steps back and waits for goals that never arrive with no real thought given to what a player actually needs to perform inside a new league, a new city, a new set of physical demands. 8 players. 8 stories. And if you lay them out next to each other, something becomes clear that the individual stories don't always make obvious on their own. Ali Dia walked into the Premier League through a door that should never have opened, and nobody who mattered asked the right questions until it was too late. Bebe arrived through legitimate channels, with real money and the full trust of the greatest manager of his generation, and still ended up as a footnote because the people around the deal had more to gain from it closing than from it being the right call. Bogarde sat inside a contract and collected his wages with the kind of cold clarity that the game never acknowledges but quietly enables because the contract existed and nobody thought carefully enough before offering it. Taibi carried a confidence that one bad afternoon dismantled in front of millions of people, and the Premier League's ability to replay that moment on loop till it became his entire identity finished what the goal had started. Nzereko was 19 years old, dropped into a struggling club thousands of miles from home, with £9 million worth of expectation and no one around him equipped to help carry it. Grabai crossed from Serie B to the Premier League and discovered a gap that his goals in Italy had given nobody any reason to predict. Van Wolfswinkel scored on the first day and then watched confidence drain away across a season that a relegation-threatened squad had no tools to rescue. And Altidore missed, and missed again, inside a club that was already falling apart around him. What connects all of them isn't a lack of talent exactly. It's the gap between what the game promises and what it actually delivers, and how completely unprepared the system often is for what happens when the gap opens up. Clubs spend the money and move on to the next problem. Agents close the deal and collect the fee. Managers answer the questions at the press conference and redirect to the next fixture. The player is left standing in the gap alone, and the cameras are always there when they fall. Gary Lineker doesn't tell these stories to be cruel. That's what makes them worth hearing from him specifically. He played at the top of the game for 15 years, scored goals at a World Cup, and never once picked up a booking. The career was as clean as it gets. So when he sits down with Shearer on a podcast and says, plainly, that a player was genuinely the worst he'd ever seen, he's not performing outrage or chasing a reaction. He's reporting what he witnessed. And what he witnessed, in every one of these cases, was the game showing its hardest face to people who weren't ready for it, or weren't equipped for it, or in one case had no business being on the pitch in the first place. Football is brutal in a way the highlight reels don't show. The failures are public, the footage stays forever, and the gap between being remembered as a legend and being remembered as a cautionary tale is sometimes one soft goal rolling through your hands on a Tuesday night at Southampton. Lineker understands that better than most. He scored 48 goals in 80 games for England and still talks about the ones that didn't go in. The men on this list never got the chance to balance the ledger. The game doesn't hand out quiet endings to players who struggled. It hands them a number of appearances, goals, fee paid, money collected, and lets everyone draw their own conclusions. What these 8 stories ask you to do is look past the number and at the person behind it. Some of them were conned into the game. Some were dropped into situations designed to break them. Some made choices they understood completely and stood by without apology. None of them were simply bad footballers in a vacuum. They were bad footballers in a specific time, in a specific system, inside a machine that moved on the moment they stopped being useful. That's the part Lineker's list gets right, and it's the part football doesn't always want to sit with. If you want more stories the game tries to look past, subscribe and stay close and drop your own worst 11 in the comments below.